Okay, perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrina Pelton-Smith. I'm the CEO and founder of the Business of Charity, and this is session 2 of the nonprofit bootcamp curriculum being offered here at the Maryland Blockchain Association conference. And I am thrilled to be presenting today, but I hate that I am not there in Maryland. I hear that there is so much going on that is all amazing. So next year, I will be able to be in person. So, with that being said, we will get started with today's session. Yesterday's session, we ran just a little bit over. So, today I have made sure that we have enough time for questions and answers. And so, we will have a Q&A screen that we will stop and I will pause and answer any questions that there may be. So, today's session is on board building. And board building is obviously important. If you had the opportunity to attend yesterday, then you're aware that the board really is the backbone of your organization. And in fact, we will talk about their structure and their importance and as well today. So with that being the case, let me switch to the next slide. Okay. So purpose of the board. And so how this session will flow, and I want to make sure that none of my screen is being blocked. There we go. So we will talk about the purpose of the board, key positions, what members should know about being board members of any organization, how to recruit and run organized meetings. We're going to then talk about what they should do in terms of helping you to fundraise and potentially talk about homework should you choose to continue the course of this because as I said, this is a boot camp that I offer. And with that being said, this is actually session 2 of 9 sessions where we talk about the foundation of running a nonprofit and obtaining funding. So at the end, as I said, we will have questions. We're a time for you all to have question and answers, and hopefully you'll be able to incorporate this into the work that you're doing now. So let's talk about the board's role and responsibilities. So there are key 3 areas where the board has oversight and should be fully active and engaged with any nonprofit organization. First and foremost, that is governance, because they are literally the legal guardian of your organization. I think you heard me say yesterday that a nonprofit is like birthing a baby and then handing that baby over to individuals to raise and care for it. And so essentially those individuals that you're raising or giving the baby over to raise it is the board of directors. Now, many of my founders often sit on their boards for that very reason, because they want to have a say in how the nonprofit is run and operated in the services that it provides. But sometimes my nonprofit leaders do not sit on the board, but rather become its executive. And so with that being the case, that means that the board still, while they have the voice of the founder, are still ultimately responsible for running it. And talk a little bit about founder syndrome with that, because sometimes what I find with boards who are working with a founder is that they will allow the founder to do everything, make decisions regarding all aspects of the nonprofit, and that is not the best way to run a nonprofit. And while the founder has a voice, and if they're sitting on the board, may even have a role, and definitely is a legal guardian, they are not the final say so of the organization. The board is. And so the board must know and understand they're responsible for the strategy and the direction of the organization, policies, and then what happens when everything is going well and what happens when it is not. So with that being said, it is also a good place to remind founders and just in general individuals who are working for nonprofits that the executive director, even if that person is the founder, can be replaced in an organization. And I know that's sometimes tough for founders to hear that. Actually, I think founders should probably have a plan that if they come into an organization, that they're going to grow with it and potentially grow out of it. So the next place where the board has responsibility, obviously, is the finances. It is their job and responsibility to not only help protect the fiscal health of the organization, but they should also help raise funds. And so we will talk about that more as we go through the presentation. The next piece of it is executive oversight. They oversee the executive leader, whether that title is executive director or CEO, to ensure that the performance that they are giving to the organization is aligned with the mission and the strategy that was set out when the board sat down and created its strategic plan. So this is another key area where the oversight includes having an evaluation of the executive each year. And I know that often doesn't happen as much as it should, particularly when the founder is the executive. But that is something that funders are looking for. And remember, we are always in any of these presentations leaning into an organization having not only fundability, but sustainability. And those are actually two different things. An organization can be fundable and receive money, but not sustainable. And for a nonprofit to not be sustainable essentially means that they cannot meet their bills or their debts as they come due. Well, nonprofits are always fundraising, and so there is quite a bit of that that happens for entities where they may go through a season or a time where they're having difficulty raising funds or the donations are not coming in. This year is a telltale of that because of the high inflation and other factors that are impacting and spending for individuals. There are less donations to nonprofits. That means that they may be struggling with meeting all of their bills, and that overall for the IRS means that they're not sustainable. However, we want to make sure that when we are working with the executive and with the board, that they keep that vision in mind and make sure that they're planning for it. So, other things that are in key for this is understanding the roles that are essential. We talked about this a little bit yesterday as well. The board president, who chairs meetings and is the leader of the governance culture. So it's very important that an organization, just like any other business, just like any other corporation, has a culture. And that is usually developed with the board president and the leadership that's in place to help them keep them focused on strategic priorities. And an example of that that I can give is that I worked for an organization. I came in as their executive director after being gone for several years because I'd watched them struggle while working at a different organization. I saw them go through 3 executive directors before I applied and became the executive director. And when I was interviewed by the board, I knew that because I'd worked for the organization in leadership roles before I left and went to the other organization, I learned that culture is important. And that was one of the things that I told the board when they interviewed me. I said, if you don't want me to change the culture of this organization, then don't hire me. And because the culture at that time was very lax and loose, and it needed to have some more structure around it. And so that was one of the key things that were changed. So that's where the board president and I coming together worked to make sure that that happened. Now, interestingly enough, I changed the culture of the organization, but not the culture of the board. So that's a whole different story. We will talk about that more as we go along today. The secretary must keep the records. They're responsible for that, and many ways that that can be done. There are portals out there that the secretary can use to do that. And now with technology, I sit on a organization's board, and we use Zoom and other tools, AI tools, to be able to capture notes so that we no longer have to actually write the notes out. We just review them, correct them, and then share them with the board for their review and final vote. So there are now tools that help support secretaries, because before that wasn't always a glamorous job of a board, but it was a very necessary job, and it continues to be one. And then, of course, your treasurer, who should be reviewing your financial reports and helping the leadership interpret the health of the organization. When you have a negative number at the bottom of your statement of activities, or sometimes as people refer to it on the for-profit side, and you're probably more familiar with this, a profit and loss sheet, then it's a struggle for a nonprofit. I know sometimes people will talk about nonprofits and say, where they're not supposed to make money. That is correct. But while they're not supposed to, or incorrect in the sense of they're not making profit to distribute it outside the nonprofit. That's the whole point of it. But they should be, again, sustainable, meaning that all the funds that come in are able to keep the organization moving forward. So those are the three essential roles of the nonprofit. The next thing is what every member should know in the nonprofit ecosystem. And it doesn't matter if they have a role, whether they're a president, a secretary, or a treasurer, they should have this knowledge about the organization when they come in. In fact, what should happen for them is that they should be onboarded to the nonprofit entity. There are many different ways where that can happen. As the CEO of an organization, I would often do one-on-one onboarding with board members as they were coming in, because their time and our timing, it just made it easier for us to do a one-on-one meeting. Now with the use of technology, because that was 15 years ago, at that time we were doing in-person meetings, and now people are more comfortable accepting a meeting on Zoom or some other tool like Teams or Google Meet. And so therefore it makes it a little bit easier to do either one-on-ones or a combined joint meeting for new board members that are coming in. But what they should be taught as they're coming in is about the core identity of the nonprofit. They should know everything about the bylaws. In fact, coming in, and when they submit their application, they should in fact be given a copy of the bylaws so that they can understand the mission, the vision, and the history of the organization. And so the bylaws help them remember the leadership direction. That's the written leadership decisions of the organization. And then they have that program narrative that then allows them to see the mission, the vision, and the activities of the organization, and then a separate organizational history. I've worked for organizations that have been many years old. In fact, the one that I just talked about, New Horizon Family Center, was 30 years old when I started working there as the executive director. And so as a result of that, new members would not know the 30-year history of the organization. So we made sure that we kept an update of that every year, and that would be shared with the board members as they received, at that time, a board binder. Now we would just have an electronic file that would include all that information in it. It would also include the strategic plan. A strategic plan should be drafted and written for every board member, as well as leadership and the community, stakeholders, donors, clients should have access to it and be able to understand what the direction is of the organization. Part of that should include the service area, because sometimes some organizations are very specific about who and where they serve. One of the organizations that I worked with several years ago, is only serving East Houston. It only serves 5 zip codes. And it's a large area, but by zip code, it's a very small area when you think about how large Houston is and how many organizations serve around the city. But that was their strategic plan to make sure that they had an impact in the community in the area where they felt was underserved and under-resourced. And so as a result of that, your board members should understand that you have a very specific service areas and you may have very specific beneficiaries, meaning those that you serve. So for that particular organization, they serve those 7 zip codes and they serve anyone who is considered under-resourced and underserved. Oftentimes, they're members of the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, but not always, because they will serve any individual that is in the community and expresses a need for help. So you want to make sure you make that very clear. Running the domestic violence agency and sexual assault agency, that's what New Horizon was. We served a 3 county area. We served Harris County here in Houston, but on the east side of it, we served Chambers County, which was adjacent, and Liberty County, which was adjacent to it. And so that was our service area. And we said that we would serve anyone between the ages of 0 to 99. And that's very specific because that's what our grant funders would ask us. Who do you serve? I have other clients right now who are working in the domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking areas. And both of those agencies have very different guidelines about who and what type of demographic they will serve. For instance, the human trafficking organization will only serve individuals who are 18 and up. Whereas my domestic violence and sexual assault agency in a west side of Houston, Harris County, will serve anyone from the ages of 5 and up. So those are all things that are important when you're talking about your board member understanding what you do and how you do it. And they should also know the program. So, if you have a program that's just one program and that's all you do, that's relatively easy. But if you have multiple programs, which is often true for nonprofits, then they should understand at least the basics about each one of those. The other thing they should understand is performance, such as your supporting data. Why do you do what you do? What are the objectives of what you are doing? How do you measure that? And what are your outcomes? And we talked about this a little bit yesterday because you should have short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes for your organization. And then your past performance. How well have you served your community? Have you served intentionally only 15 people in your community because that's your focus, because you are looking at quality versus quantity? Or are you serving a huge number of individuals, but not necessarily being able to meet all the needs? And so you partner with other organizations, and that is okay too. But you need to be able to be clear about past performance and also what you could not do, because there is sometimes funders will look at it and say, well, you served 1,000, and then you say to them, yes, but we turned away 300, and we could have served a total of 1,300 had we had additional resources. So it's also important that you also capture anything that you could not do and the reasons why you could not complete that. So the last thing a board member should know is your viability. Do you have any partnerships that should be addressed? Affiliations? Are you connected to organizations? And that would be like, for instance, the Texas Council on Family Violence. We were a member of that organization. So it was, we were affiliated and it helped us to obtain funding. And then again, back to sustainability. You're going to hear a lot about sustainability simply because if you're not sustainable, you will find that, like many organizations, you may close. New Horizon ultimately closed in 2012 because it was not sustainable. While we had $1 million worth of contracts on the desk the day that we closed, we did not have operating money. We'll talk more about that in the budgeting section tomorrow. So when you are looking at board members, you also want to make sure that you recruit for the fit, for the need of the organization or the function, and then, of course, the future of the organization. Because today you may be providing services in say navigation, meaning you're helping providing information referral for individuals who call you, but ultimately you want to have a shelter, be a residential facility. And so with that, you're going to make sure that you're looking at how do we plan for board members to join us that will be able to help us grow and scale. So you should align your gaps with what you need in terms of expertise, influence, and commitment. There is a board matrix that will be shared with you. And on that matrix, you will be able to see that individuals are going to be aligned based upon their current, what they offer to the organization. And then when you recognize that you have a gap in your matrix, you then recruit specifically to that. So generally, we talked a little bit about this, that you're looking for board members that can, serve you sometimes in very specific areas. But sometimes you're also looking for those who can give you growth. And those may not be in your mind when you're thinking about who should be on your board until you have a matrix in front of you and you recognize, well, we want to go here and we don't have anyone at this time that can help us go in that direction. And we need to recruit for that. So how do you recruit for them? Well, before you start recruiting, you want to make sure that you have some guidelines in place that help them. I like to give them what we call either a role description or a job description because you want them to understand the commitment they are getting ready to make. Sometimes that commitment means that they may have to give a certain amount of hours. Particularly if they're active board members, you may require that they attend all the meetings that you offer. The meetings may be, let's say, 10 meetings a year. So those meetings are 2 hours. That's 20 hours across the year for them to come in and meet with or be online for an online meeting. You want to make sure that they understand that before they start the role. You want to make sure that they also are committed to the organization and that they're going to provide funding through a give or get policy. Now, give or get means that they are going to either write a check, money for the organization, or they're going to go out and recruit someone who can give that amount of money, or sometimes both. It depends on the organization and how much the policy states that you will give. So some organizations may say, I've had some organizations start with as little as $250, and then I've had other organizations where that policy is $20,000 or more. You would just have to make it where it's reasonable for you and what your organization is doing. And then you also want to talk about the benefits of service. A lot of people come to organizations to volunteer as a board member because they have some type of alignment with the mission. Maybe they were formerly homeless, maybe they were a survivor of domestic violence or sexual assault, maybe they were trafficked. And as a result, they now want to come back and give back to the community. So you want to make sure that you align your organizational guidelines that help them meet them where they are, whatever their reason and rationale is for joining the board, and you would include that information in the application so that they would share why they want to come and join with your organization. Because what you do want to avoid is someone who's simply coming to put your organization's name on their resume. You want someone who's going to be active and working with you. And so you want to understand, again, who you're profiling, where to recruit for that particular type of individual or candidate, and then how the meetings will be structured when you do have a list of candidates that you would like to bring in. And you want to make sure they have a commitment that's going to be clear as a yes before they start. So recruiting them, you can use various volunteer forums, such as here in Houston, we have what's called Volunteer Match and Volunteer Houston. And one of the things that I did was that I actually had put out a posting saying we were recruiting for board members. Please send me your resume. And then I would do screening calls with them to see if it was a good fit. One of them, it was not a good fit because our board meetings were Monday nights on the fourth Monday of each month. And we were in a city called Baytown, which is on the east side of Harris County, headed towards like Louisiana. And she worked in a community called Katy, which was on the west side of town. And at that time, it would probably have taken her about an hour to come from Katy to Baytown. Now it'd probably take you almost an hour and a half, depending on the time. And so it just wasn't a good fit for her to join the board. So those are things that you're also looking for before you ask someone to commit to the organization. So one of the things that I will include with this also is a role description and a give or get policy so that you will be able to see what those look like, and then tailor them to your needs. When you're running a board meeting, you want to make sure that the board meeting is focused on keeping the organization structured as well as capturing information and data. So you make sure you have minutes that describe anything that happened during the meeting, particularly any board votes, because you want to make sure you have a a history that captures that in case your funders ever come back and question a decision. You can have documents to support that. You want to make sure you have financial reports so that you can review and understand the health of the organization, as well as where you may be needing to be a little bit more assertive and aggressive in fundraising or capture any crisis before it comes down the pipe. Now, one of the things that I required for my staff when I was leading was that I needed not only the statement of activity of how much money we spent, but we also needed a cash flow report so that I could understand and the board could as well know how much money was needed in any time period that was upcoming. And then the last thing you want to make sure that you have as part of your board package, and so all of this would be packaged together either electronically or actual physical copies so that they could review them at the meeting. And you want to make sure you send that out to them in advance so that one of the things I included was an executive report. Every month, the organization received a operations report ranging from our staffing levels all the way out to facility issues because we had a 10,000 square foot facility that also had to be maintained. And so we made sure that I can make sure that that information was included in the report so that they could see it and we could reference it as we were going through our meeting. So as you are running your meetings, you want to make sure too that board members understand they are your ambassador. They should be able to give you a 30-second to 1 minute pitch to explain the mission, the vision, the need and the benefit, who you serve, why you serve, where you serve, in a very quick 1 minute pitch. Now, let's say they end up on the elevator with some billionaire. We'll say that it's Elon Musk, and he's giving you the 1 minute ride up to his suite to talk about your nonprofit. Can your board member do that? To help them do that, you should give them a 1 minute pitch about the organization and have them practice it, just like we would if we were practicing for any other presentation or if we were talking to a potential donor. So you want to make sure that you have that information available for them and give them time to practice it during your board meetings as well. And then they should understand about the donor cultivation cycle. Now, that in and of itself is about a 30-minute presentation. So I won't do a deep dive into it. But if you Google it, and I will also share one, is that you will see that it values relationship building over asking for money. So before you jump into asking for money, make sure that you have a relationship, a way to build relationships. Now, we've covered a lot of information really, really quick. So a couple of things I want to make sure that we highlight is that, if you have a recruiting gap, let's talk about what you're missing right now. What skill or capacity or experience do you need? So you will find that again on your board matrix. You want to talk about the quality of your meetings. I just had this experience with another group that I sit on the board where the meetings became very, very hostile because of some changes that were made. And so as a result of that, we had to shift some things. Some people left, new people came in, and it changed the tone of our board meetings. But as a result of that, once we went in and changed the tone, things then went back to being smooth and we were able to move forward and function well as part of that meeting. So you want to make sure that your documents, your board package, and then also your process of meeting helps you move the organization forward. If not, you need to come back and assess that and make a determination as to what you can do to fix that. And then fundraising confidence. Can every board member explain your case? Can they give that 1 minute pitch to Elon Musk that would help your organization raise money? And so those are some of the key things from this presentation that you should take away, as well as look at the next piece, which is complete your board recruiting matrix. And as I said, I will share that so that you'll be able to lay that out and use it in your organization and your board meetings. Create your 30-second to 1 minute elevator pitch because you want your board members and give them speaking points. So you want them to be able to describe your organization consistently and confidently. If someone asks why they're a board member, you want them to be able to say, this is why. And I have seen in other organizations where a board member has said, I don't know what to say. So this helps them to be able to fill that gap. And then for your fundraising and your donor cultivation, you identify an activity where you can begin to cultivate relationships between you and potential board members, donors, volunteers. So any questions? Oh, I touched it. There we go. Any questions? Well, if there are no questions today, then I will share my contact information. So I hope we are able to stay connected.
We actually have some questions in the
Oh, there
room.
we go. Okay.
Sorry for that, yes?
Miss Bit, but can you simplify what the difference is, um, for a foundation and a nonprofit, and who would you recommend each to? The kind of person that has, depending on their idea.
So depending on, to be frank, there is not a difference under the when you're thinking about a foundation versus a nonprofit, they're both the type of nonprofit. And so you're not having any issues there. You're both going to have its tax exemption. The difference between what I think you're probably thinking of is a nonprofit that provides direct services. So those are traditional 501c3 organizations. And then you're thinking about a foundation that makes the gifts and the donations to those 501c3s. So both of them are 501c3s. One of them has a little other subsection to it. That's the private foundation. And a private foundation essentially is where someone has decided that either because they are a business, let's say Exxon was a huge funder for New Horizon, or let's say a organization or a company that maybe myself, the business of charity, I decide that I also want to start a foundation in addition to my business, for-profit business. And so that happens quite frequently. It depends on what the purpose and the role of that organization is. If you're looking to do direct services, there is what's called a direct operating foundation, which does both direct services as well as gives money to entities. You can do that type of organization, or you can do just the traditional nonprofit charity where you're doing just services. Those are all, it just really depends on what your function and purpose of starting the organization would be. And so that's where I would recommend sitting down with a consultant such as myself, talking about that so that you can get the direction that your organization needs to move in.
Okay, is your consulting, is it free?
My initial consultation is free, and then we talk about, what services can be offered.
Grant writing, does that include grant writing for like a PhD student?
It does not include grant writing for PhDs. That's more individual focused. But we do actually do grant writing for nonprofits and for-profit businesses. And so maybe there is a direct connect. That would be probably a question for us to have a conversation around.
Okay, for the foundational, is someone able to, someone had told me this, I'm not sure if it's true. The person that donates the money, are they also able to get the tax write-off?
Yes.
Okay,
And in fact, I recommend that you do it in such a way that it's clear you can get the tax write-off. Because sometimes founders will spend the money directly from their bank account. And rather than do that, you really should go ahead and donate that money to the organization and its bank account, and then make those payments from that so that you can get a donation receipt. Now, there are other ways that you can document it if you pay it directly out of your account. But to show growth and health for the organization, I always recommend that you go ahead and make that donation directly to it. And so as a result, those are options that, yes, will allow you to get the benefit of that donation.
I have one. So you have this, you said you choose your board member based upon efficiencies in what the board matrix?
Yes.
Okay, is there a slide for what that matrix?
There is not a slide, unfortunately, because I had to keep it really tight, but I will share the slides and the documents. And so I believe Jackie is going to distribute that to the individuals, or if you want to reach out to me directly, I can do that as well.
All right, I'll reach out directly and just reply back.
Okay.
okay, I have one last question. What
Mm-hmm.
if there's 1 year, for example, like, you know, how right now with inflation and everything, you don't get funding? Do you still every year have to submit paperwork to keep
Yes.
students going, even if there's no
Yes.
funding? Okay,
Yes. And that, if you were here for our compliance yesterday session, that is very important. You have 3 consecutive years of non-filing. They will revoke your status. There is no appeal. You have to start over.
okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Any other questions?
Any other questions? No, I think that's it. I think that's it, actually.
All right. Well, thank you all so much today. I am so glad I was able to get through the entire presentation. I look forward to having you all attend for the rest of the week. And if not, reach out to me. I'm happy to support and help.
Thank you.
Thank you.